Picture this. A Russian warship cuts through the frigid waters of the Pacific, its wake disturbing sheets of broken ice. But something's different. This isn't the Russian Pacific Fleet operating from Vladivostok. These ships are sailing from Novo-Arkhangelsk, the bustling capital of Russian America, where golden Orthodox church domes pierce a skyline of modern skyscrapers. In the harbor below, cargo ships from 3 continents unload their wares as dock workers call out in a fluid mixture of Russian, English, and Native Alaskan languages, a unique dialect born from generations of cultural fusion. The year is 2024, and on the western coast of North America, oil executives in fur-lined coats discuss petroleum prices in what locals call Alaskan Creole, a language as hybrid as the society that created it. Native Alaskan corporate leaders sit on boards alongside descendants of Russian nobility, their conference rooms decorated with both traditional tribal art and portraits of long-dead Romanovs. This isn't science fiction. This could have been our reality if one decision in 1867 had gone differently. In 1867, Russia made what might be the most consequential real estate deal in history. For $7.2 million, roughly the price of a couple of luxury apartments in modern Manhattan, they sold Alaska to the United States. To put this in perspective, imagine if today's United States sold Texas to China. That's the scale we're talking about. But why would an empire sell off a piece of territory larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined? To understand this, we need to step into the grand halls of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, where Russian officials wrestled with an empire that had grown almost too vast to comprehend. The empire had just lost the Crimean War, their coffers were empty, and their vast territory was becoming increasingly difficult to defend. Looking at a map, Alaska seemed impossibly far from St. Petersburg, a distant, frozen realm where even the Russian Orthodox churches struggled to maintain their golden domes against the Arctic winds. In the port of Novo-Arkhangelsk, then a modest collection of wooden buildings dominated by a single Orthodox cathedral. Russian administrators watched British ships sailing past with growing concern. The British Empire, at its height, was hungrily eyeing any territory it could add to its collection. Russian officials reasoned that if they couldn't keep Alaska, they might as well sell it to America, Britain's rival, and at least get something out of the deal while causing problems for their recent enemy. It seemed logical at the time. After all, what value could this frozen wilderness have? The native Alaskan peoples knew the true wealth of their lands, but in the halls of St. Petersburg, Alaska was just a distant drain on imperial resources. Let's rewind the tape of history and explore what might have happened if Russia had held on to Alaska. Our story accelerates in 1896, when gold was discovered in the Klondike. In our timeline, this sparked one of the greatest gold rushes in history. But in this alternate world, instead of American prospectors flooding into Canadian and American territory, they would be crossing into Russian land, forever changing the cultural landscape of North America's last imperial frontier. Picture Novo-Arkhangelsk's harbor in 1896, Russian patrol boats flying the double-headed eagle flag, monitoring a stream of American and Canadian ships, their decks crowded with prospectors dreaming of fortune. The sound of ship horns mingles with Orthodox church bells, while on the docks, the first hints of what would become Alaskan Creole emerge as Russian customs. Officials and American miners developed their own pidgin language to facilitate trade. The streets below the Orthodox cathedral became a fascinating cultural experiment. Grizzled American prospectors sharing crowded saloons with Cossack patrolmen, while native Alaskan guides, long accustomed to navigating between different cultures, became crucial intermediaries in this new society. Orthodox priests, their robes dusty from construction sites, blessed mining operations while incorporating elements of native Alaskan spiritual traditions into their ceremonies, a cultural fusion that would become characteristic of this unique corner of the Russian Empire. In one particularly colorful incident from our alternate history, a Russian governor named Ivan Petrolov faced a crisis when thousands of American miners threatened to overwhelm the small Russian garrison at Skagway. Rather than risk a violent confrontation, Petrolov orchestrated an ingenious solution. He established a joint Russian-American mining commission, allowing Americans to prospect under Russian rules while paying taxes to the Tsar. Native Alaskan leaders were granted positions on the commission, recognizing their crucial role in the territory's development. This decision would set the template for Russian Alaska's future, pragmatic, multicultural, and uniquely positioned between East and West. The harbor that had once serviced only fur trading vessels now bustled with steamships from San Francisco, Victoria, and Vladivostok. Each ship brought not just prospectors and supplies, but new linguistic and cultural influences that would shape this emerging society. The Russian-American company's old warehouses were converted into multilingual trading houses, where business was conducted in a growing mixture of Russian, English, and native Alaskan languages. But beneath the surface of this cultural fusion, tensions were building. British naval vessels patrolling from their bases in Canada made increasingly frequent appearances off the coast. The United States found itself in the uncomfortable position of having both its greatest potential rival and a valuable trading partner on its doorstep. And in St. Petersburg, debate raged about how to manage this distant territory that was rapidly becoming more valuable and more difficult to control. This delicate balance of power would soon be tested by events that would shake the foundations of not just Alaska, but the entire world. The ships entering Novo-Arkhangelsk's harbor would soon carry not just miners and merchants, but soldiers and refugees, as the 20th century unleashed its fury on the Russian Empire. By 1914, Russian Alaska had evolved into something unprecedented in world history. From the harbor of Novo-Arkhangelsk, now a modern port city where steam whistles competed with church bells, you could see the physical manifestation of this transformation. The original Orthodox cathedral, its golden domes gleaming in the Arctic sun, stood surrounded by a fascinating architectural hybrid, Russian imperial buildings adapted to American industrial practices, their walls decorated with native Alaskan art motifs. In the streets below, a new society spoke its own language, a unique dialect that would perplex linguists for generations to come. When World War I erupted, this cultural experiment faced its first major test. Russian Alaska transformed from a distant curiosity into a strategic linchpin. The territory's position, straddling the Pacific and Arctic, suddenly became invaluable. German raiders hunting Allied shipping in the Pacific found themselves confronted by an unexpected threat, a modernized Russian-Alaskan fleet, built through decades of cooperation with American shipyards, crewed by men who could swap between Russian, English, and native Alaskan languages as easily as they navigated the treacherous northern waters. Picture the scene in Novo-Arkhangelsk's naval headquarters, 1916. Russian officers in modified American-style uniforms pore over maps with U.S. Navy representatives, while native Alaskan scouts provide crucial intelligence about Arctic conditions. The naval strategies they developed would blend Russian defensive doctrine with American aggressive tactics and indigenous knowledge of Arctic warfare. Another example of the unique fusion that characterized this society. In 1917, as revolution engulfed mainland Russia, Alaska faced its moment of truth. The territory's governor, Alexander Kostomitinov, stood in his office overlooking the harbor, where Russian warships anchored alongside American merchant vessels. Through his windows, he could see the Orthodox cathedral where he had prayed that morning, and beyond it, the native Alaskan cultural center where his children attended school. The choice before him was stark: declare for the Bolsheviks, support the White Russians, or chart their own course. What happened next would reshape the map of North America. Kostomitinov, reading the message announcing the Tsar's abdication, made an unprecedented decision. In a radio broadcast delivered in 3 languages, Russian, English, and Aleut, he declared, "While Russia searches for its future, we must secure ours." The broadcast ended with church bells tolling across the city, a sound that would become synonymous with Alaska's independence. The territory quickly became a refuge for White Russians fleeing the revolution. Novo-Arkhangelsk's harbor, once filled with merchant ships and fishing boats, now received vessels of every description carrying desperate refugees. Grand duchesses arrived on converted fishing boats, imperial officers worked as dockhands, and aristocratic families learned to pan for gold alongside American prospectors. Among them was Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich, the Tsar's brother, who would help forge something entirely new from these disparate elements. By 1920, what emerged was unprecedented, a surviving fragment of Imperial Russia, transformed by American influence and Arctic isolation into something the world had never seen before. They called it New Russia, but it wasn't the Russia of the Tsars or the Soviets. In the newly expanded government buildings of Novo-Arkhangelsk, now unofficially called the Northern Petersburg, the Grand Duke worked with a coalition of moderate White Russians, American businessmen, and native Alaskan leaders to establish a constitutional monarchy that balanced Russian traditions with American-style democratic institutions. The new state's first parliament building embodied this fusion. Designed by an American architect, built with Alaskan materials, crowned with Orthodox domes, and decorated with native Alaskan art. Inside, delegates debated in 3 languages, while outside, ships from around the world brought new ideas, new technologies, and new challenges to this unique society. But this remarkable experiment in cultural fusion would soon face its greatest test as the drums of another world war echoed across the Pacific. June 22, 1941. In 3 different stations across the northern Pacific, radio operators received the same shocking news. Nazi Germany had invaded the Soviet Union. In Novo-Arkhangelsk's government district, where Orthodox domes now shared the skyline with modern radio towers, this news created an unprecedented historical paradox. 3 Russian states now existed simultaneously: the Soviets in Moscow, the Nazi-controlled territories, and New Russia in Alaska, each claiming to be the true heir to Russian civilization. For Grand Duke Michael, watching from his office as military vessels filled Novo-Arkhangelsk's harbor, the strategic calculus was complex. The same ships that had once carried his family to safety from the Bolsheviks might now need to carry aid to their sworn enemies. This wasn't just a military decision, it was a civilizational choice that would test the unique hybrid society New Russia had become. The decision came on December 8, 1941, one day after Pearl Harbor, in what historians would later call the 3 languages speech. The Grand Duke addressed his people in Russian, English, and Aleut, each language representing a strand of New Russia's DNA. Today, we set aside old grievances. The motherland calls, and we must answer not for ideology, but for humanity. What followed was perhaps history's most unusual military alliance. Picture the scene at Novo-Arkhangelsk's naval yards in early 1942 Soviet. Merchant ships being loaded with new Russian oil by crews speaking Alaskan Creole, while American military advisors helped coordinate convoy routes. Native Alaskan scouts, their traditional knowledge now integrated into modern military doctrine, trained both Soviet and American forces in Arctic warfare. The hybrid nature of new Russian society proved remarkably advantageous. Their military forces combined Russian cold weather expertise, American industrial efficiency, and native Alaskan Arctic knowledge. Their ships' crews could communicate with both Soviet and American forces, making them invaluable intermediaries. Even their Orthodox priests played a unique role, helping Soviet sailors feel at home in new Russian ports, while maintaining crucial differences from Soviet atheism. Consider this remarkable scene from 1943 in a converted fishing boat off the Aleutian coast. A joint task force demonstrated the full complexity of this arrangement. A new Russian officer who'd fled Petrograd as a child worked alongside a Soviet naval commander and an American intelligence officer. Their mission? Coordinating submarine warfare against Japan, using a unique combination of native Alaskan navigation knowledge, Soviet submarine tactics, and American radar technology. Their working language: a sophisticated version of Alaskan Creole that had evolved to include military terminology from 3 nations. But this cooperation had its limits. When Soviet forces pushed west into Europe, New Russia maintained a careful balance. Their aid would help defeat Nazi Germany, but not extend Soviet power. As the Grand Duke famously remarked during a naval review in 1944, speaking in the now refined Alaskan Creole, "We help Russia fight for survival, not Stalin fight for empire." The war transformed Novo-Arkhangelsk into something unprecedented, a meeting point between 3 versions of Russian civilization. Soviet sailors walked streets where Orthodox traditions flourished freely. American forces encountered a unique hybrid culture that challenged their assumptions about Russian society. And native Alaskans, their influence now deeply woven into new Russian institutions, demonstrated how indigenous knowledge could be crucial to modern warfare. By war's end, New Russia had cemented its unique position in world affairs. But as Soviet and American forces began their new global standoff, this hybrid society would face perhaps its greatest challenge yet. The Cold War was coming, and this time, it would be a 3-sided affair that would reshape the strategic balance of the entire northern Pacific. The peace celebrations in Novo-Arkhangelsk's harbor would soon give way to a new kind of tension, as 3 nuclear powers prepared to face off across the Bering Strait. By 1946, as Winston Churchill declared that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, a more complex curtain was taking shape across the Pacific. In Novo-Arkhangelsk's expanded harbor, where Orthodox church bells now competed with the sound of jet engines, a new kind of warship appeared, sleeker, quieter, carrying technologies that would have been unimaginable just years before. The strategic geometry of this new conflict defied traditional Cold War logic. 3 powers, each with their own version of Russian identity, now faced each other across the world's most militarized waterway. The Bering Strait had become more than a geographical boundary. It was the front line of an ideological triangle. Picture the Situation Room beneath Novo-Arkhangelsk's modernist government complex, 1955. Advanced radar screens showing Soviet, American, and new Russian vessels engaged in an elaborate dance of deterrence. The officers monitoring these screens represented the culmination of new Russia's hybrid evolution. Many were children of white Russian refugees, educated in American technical schools, trained in native Alaskan navigation techniques, and fluent in all three cultures of their unique society. The strategic balance was unprecedented. New Russia controlled key choke points between the Pacific and Arctic, its fleet combining Soviet-style submarine tactics with American technology and native Alaskan ice navigation techniques. Their unique position allowed them to monitor both Soviet and American movements while maintaining their own independent strategic doctrine. But the real game changer came in 1949. The world had barely processed the shock of the Soviet Union's first atomic test when, months later, New Russia made its own announcement in a broadcast delivered in their now standardized Alaskan Creole. They revealed their own nuclear capability, developed through a remarkable collaboration between white Russian physicists, American-trained engineers, and domestic scientific talent. Imagine the strategic complexity: 3 nuclear powers, 2 claiming to be the legitimate government of Russia, all within missile range of each other across the Bering Strait. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 wasn't just about Caribbean politics. It triggered simultaneous tensions in the North Pacific as new Russian and Soviet forces faced off across the strait, their missiles aimed at each other's capitals, while American forces maintained their own delicate balance. This three-way standoff produced something remarkable: the Bering Doctrine. Military planners had to develop entirely new strategic concepts to handle this triangular deterrence. The monthly meetings in neutral Juneau became a fascinating exhibition of cultural fusion. Soviet officers, new Russian diplomats, and American strategists communicating in a sophisticated military dialect that borrowed from all three powers' strategic vocabularies. By the 1970s, this complex balance had produced unexpected innovations. New Russia's hybrid culture proved remarkably adaptable to technological development. Their cybernetics programs combined Soviet mathematical rigor with American computer technology and indigenous systems thinking. Their submarines, equipped with systems that drew from all three naval traditions, were arguably the most sophisticated in the Arctic. In Novo-Arkhangelsk's universities, where onion domes now stood alongside modern research facilities, a unique scientific culture emerged. Soviet defectors worked alongside American-trained researchers and native Alaskan environmental experts, producing breakthroughs in everything from Arctic engineering to climate science. But perhaps the most remarkable development was in space technology. By 1975, 3 different space programs watched the Arctic from orbit. New Russia's satellites, launched from the world's northernmost space center in the Aleutians, combined technologies from all three powers while adding their own innovations in cold weather operations. As we approach the modern era, this three-sided Cold War would face a new challenge: the rapidly changing Arctic environment. The same waters that had once been battlegrounds for submarine warfare were beginning to open up, creating new opportunities and threats for all three powers. Remember that Russian warship from our opening scene? By 2024, such vessels navigate through increasingly ice-free Arctic waters, but they're no longer alone. The modern port of Novo-Arkhangelsk, where golden Orthodox domes now stand alongside sleek climate research centers, hosts an unprecedented variety of vessels: new Russian icebreakers equipped with artificial intelligence, American climate monitoring ships, and Soviet successor state research vessels, all navigating newly opened shipping lanes that indigenous peoples had known about for generations. Climate change has transformed the strategic calculation that began with that fateful 1867 decision. The same Arctic waters that once trapped early Russian explorers now offer new possibilities and new dangers. Modern Novo-Arkhangelsk exemplifies this transformation. Its historic harbor, once built for fur traders, now accommodates advanced polar research vessels, while its universities have become world leaders in climate science through their unique combination of indigenous knowledge, Russian scientific traditions, and American technological innovation. Consider this scene from a modern new Russian research station. Scientists using artificial intelligence systems programmed in Alaskan Creole, now a standardized language combining Russian, English, and native Alaskan elements, analyze ice core samples using methods that blend indigenous environmental knowledge with cutting-edge technology. Their findings are shared simultaneously with laboratories in Moscow, Washington, and leading Arctic research centers worldwide. The three-way power dynamic has evolved into something more complex. New Russia's hybrid society proved remarkably adaptable to 21st century challenges. Their educational system, combining Russian theoretical depth with American pragmatism and indigenous environmental wisdom, produces engineers and scientists uniquely qualified to address Arctic challenges. Their corporate structure, featuring state companies, American-style private enterprises, and native Alaskan corporations, demonstrates an alternative to both Western capitalism and state-controlled economies. We began our journey with a single ship cutting through Arctic waters. Now, looking across this alternate 2024, we see how a single diplomatic decision in 1867 cascaded through history, creating ripples that transformed not just Alaska, but the entire global order. Three critical insights emerge from our exploration. First, the intersection of geography and power. Alaska wasn't just territory, it was a pivot point between continents, cultures, and competing visions of the future. The same waters that once carried Russian fur traders now host autonomous research vessels studying rapidly changing Arctic ecosystems, demonstrating how geographic significance evolves with technology and environmental change. Second, the economic butterfly effect, from gold rushes to oil booms to climate adaptation technologies. Resources that seemed worthless in 1867 repeatedly transformed global power dynamics. New Russia's success in combining traditional knowledge with modern innovation suggests alternative paths for resource-dependent economies in a changing world. Third, the human element. Beyond geopolitics, we've witnessed how different cultures can blend and evolve, creating something entirely new. The story of Alaskan Creole, from its origins in gold rush trading posts to its modern status as a sophisticated language of science and diplomacy, demonstrates how cultural fusion can produce remarkable innovations. This isn't just a historical thought experiment. As climate change opens new Arctic routes and resources, as nations compete for influence in the far north, the echoes of 1867 still resonate. What decisions are we making today that future historians might analyze with equal fascination? Remember how we started, with that Russian warship in Arctic waters? In our timeline, those waters belong to America. In another, they might have been Russian. But perhaps the most important lesson isn't about who controls these waters, but how decisions that seem straightforward in their moment can reshape centuries of history. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What other historical decisions do you think shaped our world in unexpected ways? Share your alternate history scenarios in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into historical what-ifs, subscribe for more explorations of history's pivotal moments. The question isn't just what would have happened if Russia kept Alaska, it's what choices are we making right now that will leave future generations watching ships pass through contested waters, wondering, what if?